Welcome to A Little Bit of Everything, a podcast where I, your host, Evelyn, aka Evie, talk about a little bit of anything and everything that comes to mind. So, today we're going to be talking about niching down social media and the fractalization of self. I know it's a little bit of a wordy and slightly obnoxious title, but hey, this is my potential podcast. I can do what I want. And I wanted to address this topic pretty early on in this nebulous concept of a Schrodinger's podcast that may or may not be coming into existence eventually. I don't know what's happening. I'm just trying it out, seeing what's going to work, all of that kind of stuff. But the reason I wanted to talk about this topic so soon is because whenever I was thinking about this, I did initially have the knee-jerk reaction to niche down, to figure out a very specific topic and create a rigid structure for all of these. But if I'm being honest, the reason why I'm starting this, at least partially, is because I have an embarrassing collection of voice memos and videos that consist of me basically talking to myself, talking through my problems, all of that kind of stuff. And while, yes, a lot of it is probably just rambles where I go over and over and over again until something finally clicks in my brain, I do think that there's definitely a time and place for me to share this kind of thing. So while this is definitely going to have more structure than my normal rants where I just hit record and then say whatever words come to my head, this is still very much going to be centered about what I want to discuss, which is probably going to be a very wide net of topics. So yeah, let's get started on this one today. So one of the first things I wanted to discuss in terms of niching down is I don't think that this is a social media exclusive thing. I think, if anything, it probably is very much related to code switching, which is something that has been studied in psychology and sociology, where basically people will act different based off of who they're with, what the situation calls for, all of that kind of stuff. One of the most simple examples is you probably act differently whenever you're around your family versus your friends versus at work, because there's different things expected of you in those situations. You are playing different roles, and none of them are inherently lying about yourself. Instead, it's more of you are who you are whenever you're with your friends, you are who you are whenever you're with your family, you are who you are when you're at work. All of those are you. It's just each one might be shining the spotlight on different aspects of you and maybe, kind of shoving other parts of yourself to the side. Like, for example, if you are at work, you probably have put on a customer service smile on days where you maybe didn't want to do that, and it might have felt a little bit forced, but that doesn't inherently mean that you're lying about who you are, right? Same with family. You may have avoided certain topics that you might be very ready to discuss with friends. You might have just different interactions, different rules, all of that kind of thing. So that, I think, is very rooted in human behavior far before the invention of even the camera, let alone internet and social media. However, I think that niching down has kind of become almost a very intense version of that, where it's like you pick a very specific interest of who you are, you take this tiny part of yourself, and that is what you present to the world. And again, with the whole code switching thing, I do think that there is inherently always going to be a part of yourself that you are not showing. Like it or not, whenever we post a picture or a video on the internet, we are technically presenting a two-dimensional version of ourselves. There's not really a way to get around that, and you're always going to be presenting yourself from certain angles, whether that's literally or metaphorically. You are choosing what to present, right? So even if you are trying to present as much of yourself as possible, I do think that there is going to be a limit. And that's kind of the wrestling I'm doing with myself right now, where I am aware that I can do whatever the hell I want with this podcast, but I also know that there are only a limited number of things I would want to talk about on here. I don't want this to necessarily devolve into basically becoming my diary where I talk about the fact that I got 3 coffees today instead of 2. Ooh. I want to actually have something to say. And again, that is inherently choosing a perspective to present myself. So I don't inherently think that that is a bad thing. However, I think a great example of this fractalization of self comes from something I recently watched, which is the most recent season of Queer Eye. There is an episode where they help a lady who is completely obsessed with the Saints, which is a sports team that is a New Orleans thing. I'm not a big sports person. I don't know if you can tell. But she is. She very much is. She's always wearing some sort of jersey or Saints merch. Her house is filled like floor to ceiling with all of this merch. She was declared the first ever fan of the year for the Saints. It's a very big deal to her. And whenever she describes herself, she nearly only exclusively talks about herself being a Saints fan. Now, I don't want to shame somebody for having an obsession, because as somebody who has been in fandom culture for a very long time, I completely understand the giddiness and the joy of communicating with somebody who has a interest in common. Whenever you go up to somebody and be like, oh my god, is that thing merch? Whoa, I love that thing too. Let's talk for a little bit. It makes a very, surface level interaction fun, and it means that you can talk to somebody about something. It creates almost like guidelines for a social interaction, if that makes sense. But as the episode goes on, it is revealed that while she has been a Saints fan for basically her entire life, she went from being a fan to like the number one fan a few years ago after a specifically traumatic event where her and her girlfriend were discriminated against because they were gay, which is a very heartbreaking realization once you realize that, oh, she's hiding behind this presentable part of herself, because whenever she can interact with people by being a Saints fan, people don't ask too many questions. People don't really judge her as much because they are only seeing this very surface level thing. And again, code switching and like presenting certain interests is a very natural way of smoothing over these shallow surface level conversations, connections, all of that kind of stuff. Like, that is not inherently a bad thing, but once you realize that it's not just that she's the number one fan, it's that she wants to identify as the number one fan. Because I think that there is a very big difference between being open about personal interests and hiding your identity behind those interests. And that's kind of what we see in this episode, is that she is hiding behind this surface level thing that, again, a lot of people can connect with her over, and she can have these connections without feeling vulnerable, without being afraid. And basically the conclusion of the episode is that she's still allowed to be a Saints fan, of course, but she also needs to remember who she is underneath that niche. She needs to remember what she likes, what her style is, because for so long she had just been wearing, like a Saints hoodie and basketball shorts every day. And like, her partner talked about how she loved it whenever she used to dress up. She had this cute little wooden bow tie, which I wish they brought back, but I don't think that they did. But her style has probably changed. It's been a few years, but she had been hiding that part of herself because it was really easy to present this one side, this one angle that puts a lot of herself in shadow. And the bigger and bigger and bigger she made the Saints fan a part of her personality, it feels like the less nurturing she did of the other aspects of herself. Now, that is of course an extreme example, but it's one that I very much related to. Obviously, I'm not a big sports fan, but I do relate to almost hiding behind my interests, hiding behind fandoms or skills or whatever, I relate to kind of almost hiding behind parts of yourself that you know are almost more easily digestible, more socially acceptable, things that make these shallow, surface level interactions easier. And I mean, bringing this back to social media, what is social media if not billions upon billions of seemingly endless, shallow interactions with each other? Like I said before, we quite literally reduce ourselves down to being two-dimensional when taking photos or videos of ourselves, and there's not really a way around that, even if, like I said, I try my best to be authentic. Even if I try to cover a wide range of topics on this podcast, I'm still presenting a version of myself. But I don't inherently think that it is a bad thing. I think that that's human nature to a certain extent. I think that we naturally code switch. Like, I am obviously speaking in a slightly different cadence than if I was just recording this for myself. I'm trying to actually stay on topic for once. I'm trying to actually make a point and have a coherent through line in a way that I might not if I were just recording this to brain dump and just get the words out of my mouth. And I think that there is a aspect of that that's just unavoidable. But I do specifically want to talk about niching down. I am somebody who has kind of fallen into the instinct or been influenced into niching down myself. I have, for example, a couple of different Instagrams. I have one that is dedicated to like photos that I started in high school whenever I was, kind of going around and squatting and taking pictures of flowers on the ground. I then have another one that's dedicated more to like my crafty stuff, like my Etsy, blah, blah, blah. And I have a couple of others for a couple of other different projects that may or may not still even be relevant. So I don't even know if I want to talk about them. But it's very much my instinct to niche down. And to a certain extent, like I said, I'm going to have to do that again with this podcast. I'm probably going to have to make a email for this podcast, individual social medias if I actually want to continue this. Again, it's kind of a Schrodinger's thing where the box hasn't inherently been opened yet. But if a podcast requires me to just keep talking, I think I can do that. I think I can talk probably all day till the cows come home, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the reason why I wanted to discuss this is because, again, there's a part of me that wanted to niche down to like create a formula to follow. And I don't think that that's inherently a bad idea. I do think that niching down has its place, especially on something like the internet, where it seems that everybody is screaming into this void, and a lot of times we hear crickets back. And I think that the instinct to make yourself easily recognizable is not inherently a bad thing. But I do just genuinely think, as far as this goes for myself, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm so tired of reducing myself down into a tiny little sliver and presenting that part of myself. And I think I've been doing that a lot in my real life as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to break out of it and why it feels so uncomfortable for me. But again, there's so much stuff that I love that is very niche, that talks about very specific topics like storytelling, movies, psychology, and all of that kind of stuff, philosophy. Sometimes it's just, stupid, funny videos, and like that's their niche, and I fucking love it. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. The point here that I guess I'm trying to make is, even though I am creating my own niche in a way and operating in a niche of basically talking about whatever it is I want to talk about and bringing certain topics to the table and kind of just having a very stream of consciousness style, like that is inherently a niche of podcasting. So in a way, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy of social media, where any way that you interact and post, you are going to be niching down to a certain extent. Even if your niche is trying to be as authentic as possible, that is still a niche. Oh my God. Oh no, it's inescapable. Oh, is it too early to have an existential crisis? I don't know. So, anyway. And so basically, I think that the point of this is to just take this thing that I already do, which is talk to myself about anything and everything, and actually turn it into something of a creative outlet. And rather than it just sit in the voice memos on my phone, actually let it breathe. And even if it just becomes another endless thing and the white noise of everybody shouting as loud as they can on podcasting platforms, I think that I'll be okay with that. I just wanted to like share. If I'm being completely honest, I don't know the exact end goal of this besides talking into a microphone and making it seem like I'm actually doing something rather than just talking to myself alone in a room. And you know what? If that's the only thing that this accomplishes, I will say that that is a success. So, all of that being said, I hope that that was at least somewhat coherent, and if it wasn't, hey man, this is my first episode. Maybe I'll get better. Listen to the next one, maybe, if there is one. But yeah, so I'm probably going to be setting up a social media account for this, maybe, I don't know. There may or may not be an email if you want to ask questions or comment or whatever. I don't know, man. I need an outro. Okay, part of me wants to like sit here until I can tie this up in a neat little bow, and I'm starting to realize that that just means I will be sitting here probably for a whole 24 hours. So instead of that, no bows, we're just gonna end it. So whoever you are, thank you for listening. I hope that you got a little bit of something out of this little bit of everything that has come out of my mouth. I guess if this is actually going to be a thing, I will see you later, and if not, see you never, I guess. That still felt so weird. Whatever. Okay, no bows. We're ending. Bye.